Okay, so good evening to all of you, right? So from today we are going to start a new inning, I must say, right? That is A to Z. Now I would like to go for some sort of brief idea of this A to Z, and then only I'll come to the main topic, right? So basically it is called as, okay, this is called as A to Z. Now why I have been calling it A to Z? Because ultimately whenever you have been writing any examination, there is a purpose, right? And what is this purpose? That you have to write that exam, and in fact the only objective is that you have to score very good, right? As far as this history optional is concerned, for what we have been doing it, right? The way we have been doing it for precisely for history optional. So now what should be the target for history optional? Now you can make any impractical target, but then I think it's better to talk about a practical target. What is the practical target in history optional? We all have to somehow chase at least the number which is at least a marks that is somewhere near to 300. It may be plus minus 10. So basically we all have been chasing one point, that somehow we have to reach as closer as it's possible for us to 300. And in fact for getting 300 marks or for reaching closer to 300 marks, ultimately we have to keep in mind certain thing, and that can help us to reach to 300, correct? So when it comes to reaching close to 300, what are the most important things that we have to keep in mind? That's the that is the primary objective. So look, whenever it comes to whenever it comes to your journey, and then you have been trying to come to as closer as possible for you to 300. So undoubtedly it can be done only once you have been writing a good answer. That's the basic concept. When it comes to good answer, that should have a sort of concept, right? That should have a concept. Why the concept is so important? Look, now these are certain things I would like to discuss in this class, because ultimately this is going to shape rest of the thing. Why the concept is so much needed? Because if I'll ask this question, that do you really believe that there are 4 books in history, and these are the only 4 books written for the history? One for ancient India, one for medieval India, one for modern, and one for world. Is it like that? No. I believe that there are n number of books which are written, n number of books which are written. Is it possible for you, feasible, or is it feasible for you to read all the books which are written on history? That's not possible, correct? Ultimately, we have some limited time, we have limited resource, and from that limited resource, we have to somehow maximize our output. That's the main objective. That's how the concept becomes very important here, because if you have a good concept, in that case even the questions what you haven't studied directly in any particular source, right, you can at least will be able to write a sort of good answer or a better answer. Is in case of the second case, as compared to the second case where you had no idea at all, you had no concept, and that's how your answer is almost all like a 0, and that's why you are just getting a 0 marks in a question in a particular answer. So that is practically not possible. But then if you are having a good concept, in that case at least with the help of that concept you'll be able to write something that out of 10 earlier you had been expecting 0. Now by writing this particular mark, at least you can expect of getting at least 2 marks, 2.5 marks, or 3 marks. And I hope you believe that even 2.5 marks does matter in UPSC. That's very important. So one thing is the concept, correct? The second thing which is very important, that is the content, correct? Why content? Because of course you have studied something and you believe that yes, you know about that particular topic, but then you do not know whether this content suffices or not. Maybe you are believing that this content is the the best content what I could have produced. Because sometimes when I ask this question to the people, those who have been writing mains, now most of them are saying, why most of them, I'll prefer to say all of them are saying they have done exceptionally good. This is the best they could have done. Everybody is saying the same thing, but then everybody is not going to be selected for the interview. So of course only 1/3 out of them, not even 1/3, 1/5 are going to be selected. And what is how the difference is there, or in what exactly what is the exact difference between the two? So the content differs, right? So you believe that you have produced the content, but then somebody has written a better content, and that better content is giving is somehow bringing the more possibilities for them to clear this exam. So that's how content remains very important. And in fact, not only the content in order to fill the pages, but the content in terms of content with respect to a sort of quality content, right? That's also very important, that you have been producing a very quality content. That's the second thing. And the third thing that I'll say, that there should be a sort of good structure of your answer. Good structure of your answer, right? So frankly speaking, these three things are there. Now, why this structure is very important? Because sometimes with this limited time and space, you cannot produce a sort of lengthy and a good answer. You have to present your content in a very crisp manner, but the structure should be as such that ultimately you are able to take the attention of, or get the attention of the evaluator, that he or she is giving you good marks. This is the basic objective. So ultimately, I'm just trying to simplify it. I have to get good marks, and how I'm going to get good marks? If I have produced these three things, in that case I'll be definitely expecting a good marks, right? Why am I calling it A to Z? Because we'll be focusing on all the three things because of what I have been calling it A to Z. That's the simple agenda. I'll be talking about concept. I'll be giving you the content, right? And undoubtedly I'll talk about the structure also. So all the three things I'm going to hit, all the three things I'm targeting here, and that's why I've been calling it A to Z. There were so many people have they were telling this is not a perfect name. People won't be able to understand. But then it was somehow convincing me that this is the most appropriate name, because if you believe that you have read the content once, in that case I believe that this is the most suitable sort of thing for you. Why? Because somehow we are going to cater all of your requirements which are needed, right? So this is agenda number first. Now moving to the second thing. Now we are going to start with paper 1, correct? We are going to start with paper 1. So I would like to first discuss that how we are going to proceed in this particular course, that you should have the clarity that how exactly or what exactly we are going to do. As I told you that there are certain requirements and we have to cater those requirements, correct? And this is the reason because of what, it is not precisely for paper 1, in fact we are going to apply this in both the papers, right? So I'll say that what process we are going to follow and how you can take the benefit from this particular course, right? So the first thing, what we are going to do, that we'll be choosing one topic. Mostly what I have done, that in 1 week there are 3 classes, or every week, I can say every week there are 3 classes. And in fact, in one class I have just tried to keep just one topic. So in one class, one topic, or let's say 3 classes, so 3 topics, such as this is the first week which is going to start from here, and we have kept just 3 topics, and these 3 topics are sources, then the prehistory, and then megalithic. These are 3 topics we have kept. So we'll just try to finish one topic every day. Maybe there are certain topics which are bigger, or which are somehow lengthy, so maybe that can extend to the next class also. And then of course we can minimize we can reduce the time for the second and third, and we'll try to compensate this, but somehow we'll try to finish the 3 topics in 3 classes. Of course in certain places we won't be able to follow this, in one class we have been finishing one topic. We'll try to finish at least in one class one topic. That is the process what we are going to follow, right? So first of all I'll be covering the topic, but then when it comes to topic, how I'm going to cover it, that's also very important. First of all, when it comes to the topic, we have to have a sort of conceptual understanding. A conceptual understanding. Now you may ask this question, that what is the significance of this conceptual understanding? Is it needed in all the topics? Yes, I'll say it is needed in all the topics, that your concepts are very clear. Just now I had been discussing one point. I told you that it is practically impossible that you have covered all the readings on that particular topic, and that's why with that limited information, if your content is clear, your concept is clear, in that case at least we'll be able to write something. Maybe it is missing facts, maybe it is lacking facts, but at least you'll be able to write the answer, that too in a right direction. That's very important. So every topic we'll understand first conceptually. Let's say we are going to begin with sources today, right? So first we'll understand what is the significance of source and how it has to be utilized in our study. That's the most important thing, right? So we'll understand the concepts, right? And maybe some other concepts are there which are more academic, and by understanding the concepts, we are going to fix something that's called as the dimensions. Now this is a very important part, and this is also something which what I have been targeting in my program. Why dimensions? Again I'll say one thing. If you have really seen the questions properly, in that case you all can understand one point, that sometimes like they are repeating the question. This is a very famous line in history optional, that the questions are being repeated, and that's how even the toppers are also suggesting ki like just finish the 10 years questions, PYQs, and then the preparation is done. If it is the criteria, in that case I think everybody can do it. The point is that you are getting a good answer. So if you are getting a good answer of the previous 10 years questions, in that case your preparation is done. It is incorrect. Just like check out the topics. In fact, we'll see the questions also towards the end of the class, and then you can understand one thing. Ki now they have started hunting so many new dimensions. Since beginning I used to say one thing, ki if we'll compare UPSC with the previous pattern, in that case till 2010 they had been asking the 60 marker questions. When they had been asking the 60 marker questions, they had limited topic. We were supposed to write either 4 or 5 answers in the paper, and then limited topics were there. Throughout the history, or if you'll see the whole syllabus of history, there are lesser possibilities of the questions or the framing of the questions which are let's say which are of 60 markers, and that's how you could find like proper repetition of the questions or the regular repetitions of the question. But then this particular idea is not fit in the current scenario. Why? Because now they have been asking the questions of 10 marks, 15 marks, 20 marks, all these questions are being asked. In that case, you have to understand ki what are the dimensions, what are the possible dimensions. Why? Because until and unless you know the possible dimensions, you won't be able to cover everything. So in fact, not only in terms of content, even in terms of the possibility of framing of questions. Okay, one question can be framed in this manner also. So we'll be trying to hunt the various dimensions from where the questions may be questions may be framed, and somehow if you have understood that, in that case I think the journey becomes easy, because now you can prepare your content as per that. As I told you that sometimes the theme has been repeated but the new dimension is being asked. So how we are going to cater these kind of, or write the answer of these questions? So we'll just try to somehow understand the dimensions. So this is the first approach what we are going to follow. We'll cover one topic, we'll cover the conceptual sort of things, and then we'll cover the as many as possible dimensions are there in that particular topic that we'll try to cover. That is the first thing. Now moving the second thing. Now second thing, as I told you, that we'll go for the content. Now this content I'll provide what I call as one page one theme, though I'm just cheating you guys. Okay, one page one theme. Why am I calling it why I'm saying that I'm cheating you guys? I tried very hard to confine the one content or one topic in one page, but then it was not practically possible, and that's how most of the topics are going to 2 pages, right? So I think the practical name of this should be 1 page, 2 pages, 1 themes, but then it sounds better, and that's why I've been calling it 1 page, 1 theme. So we'll just try to get you the content through this, but then I'm not going to provide only the content in this way. Okay, this is the PDF read. I'll discuss everything within the class itself. Okay, yes, I won't be dictating. ये लिखिए, अभी ये लिखिए, ऐसा हम कुछ नहीं करने वाले. The content that I'll be providing, that is through the PDF. I'll be providing this, and you have got the booklet, I guess, that 1 page 1 theme wala booklet you have collected, right? So 1 page 1 theme booklet is there, and sometimes maybe some additional informations are also there, so that handouts will be provided to you, because now I'll be improving simultaneously my notes also. So whenever some new updates are there, that I'll provide. Okay, it's not necessary that everything is included, because the notes that you have received right now, that was prepared just now only 2 months back, that has been prepared, but yet I'll go for the revision of the content. So whatsoever content is there, that would be provided. So it will be discussed in the class, right? And then this content will be provided to you. This is 1 page 1 theme. Now what is there in this 1 page 1 theme, that we'll see very very soon we'll be seeing it, because I have tried to somehow incorporate most of the things, and I'll discuss that also, that what are the things which are needed, or let's better to discuss it here only. So when it comes to writing any answer, now there are different demands in paper 1 and paper 2. When it comes to your demands in paper 1, specifically if I'll discuss it for paper 1, so in paper 1 there are certain things that should be there in your answer, correct? In paper 1, there's something which is very important. That's the references of sources. You can even call it references. You can even call it the primary sources. So whatsoever name you call or you give, that is depending up to you. Primary sources. We are not referring the secondary sources. Look, sources are very important in ancient Indian history. And why it is important, that I'll discuss after some time. But then of course, if you have been referring the sources, in that case the weightage of your answer is increasing. Unfortunately, you do not refer much of the sources, right? You always write like, the sort of things, the historical narratives more, but then you do not refer. Why it's very important in paper 1? Because ultimately the sources are making your argument more concrete, and that's why I have included like, wherever it is possible, I have included the sources. Now, in what way we can include the sources? Let's say like, today we are going to deal with the first topic, let's say, which is like, the sources. Now, in sources, somewhere you are writing ki the Vedas are helping us, or let's say the Brahminical literature is helping us to know the political history, correct? Now, this is one argument that you have written. Now, this is the argument, correct? And this argument can be substantiated by giving one example, such as if you have been writing the Brahminical texts are helping us to know about the political history, and then you are referring to, okay, this is let's say this is the Vayu Puran, which is giving the genealogical list of Satavahanas. I think this is a concrete example that you have given, and as I told you that you have referred a source. So I hope you can understand by your own ki when you are writing ki the Brahminical texts are giving us the information for the let's say political history, and then you are like associating this, or you are substantiating your argument by giving one example. So which one is more concrete? It's simple to understand, and of course the person, the evaluator, would understand ki you have a deeper understanding of the subject, and that's how sources are very important. That's number one. Then it comes to like, again very important thing, that is historiography. Now, there is much chaos about this historiography, I must say. Why the chaos is there for the historiography? Because one problem I have realized with most of the people or most of the students. Now, what is that problem? Wherever you find this historiography, you include that. Where you do not find the historiography, you exclude it, right? And the best example, let's say these days majority of the students are reading Upinder Singh for ancient. That's correct. And in Upinder Singh, to a certain extent, historiography is given. That's also acceptable by me. And that's why if you'll read the answers of ancient, you'll find that there were so many students, they have been mentioning the name of scholars or the historian. But the moment it comes to medieval India, right, most of the students are excluding the historiography. And do you know the reason? Because in most of the notes also it is missing, and the most prominent book that you have been reading for the medieval, that is the book of Satish Chandra, that does not include any historiography. And since the book is not giving the historiography, you are also not writing. But then why do you think that in ancient the historiography is needed, but in medieval it is not needed? Since in medieval, like people are knowing mostly of the name of two scholars. One is Satish Chandra because they have been reading the book of Satish Chandra, and second is Irfan Habib because he is undoubtedly one of the legendary scholars or legendary historian, and that's why there's two names people are knowing. If I'll ask them about like Sireen Musbi, so they'll say, who is this Sireen Musbi? Okay. If I'll ask about them about Sanjay Subramaniam, they won't be able to understand it. Muzaffar Alam, they won't be able to understand it, right? Habibullah, they won't be able to understand it. But then it is very important, even like very much important, even in like medieval part also, and you have to include, correct? So in medieval also, like all the things are applicable. Nobody is ever mentioning about the primary source in the medieval part. Why? Because they do not read it. It is not written in Satish Chandra, and I must tell you that it is missing in most of the medieval notes. You won't find any like reference, such as when you are writing about Alauddin Khilji, and then there are two ways of writing about Alauddin Khilji. One way that you simply wrote ki Alauddin Khilji did go for this market policy and it was for this purpose, and then you are writing ki as per Barni, like this seems to be the objective of Alauddin Khilji. As per Fakre Mudabbir, this seems to be the objective of Alauddin Khilji. As per like Nizamuddin Auliya, correct, this was the objective of So I hope you can understand ki which one your answer becomes more better, like better, or let's say more concrete. So it is something which is very much applicable in both the paths, in ancient and medieval, both in paper 1. So that's the second thing that you have to keep in mind. Okay. Then the third thing, right, that is about the structuring of the answer, correct? And here I mean something else come with the structure. Look, as you all know that you always have the limited time and space for writing answers, and in that period you have to, or in that limited time, you have to manage everything. Since you are going to manage everything in that, and that's how there are certain things which can help you in writing the answer, such as you made a diagram. But then it is also correct that in the examination hall you can't imagine those diagrams. Ki, acha, this is the right time, or this is the right way of presenting your answer. Correct. And diagram does not mean ki only you have just made this and this. There might be multiple kind of diagrams which is somehow presenting the topic in such a way that the evaluator can understand ki okay, this fellow had a very good idea of the concepts, and that's how just by seeing that also he can he or she can understand ki okay, concepts is there, the facts are there, right, and they have written it. So this is what we are going to do. Like we are undoubtedly going to cover like the possible diagrams and the various various sort of structures through which we can convey our ideas in a better way. So we'll be even focusing on that part as well. Correct? What next? Yeah, sources is there, historiography there, structure is there. Yeah, then we can talk about like possible intro and conclusion as well. I believe that when you are writing answer, I think this is something which consumes most of your time. Why? Because when you are planning to write the introduction and you then start thinking, and there is a basic problem with that. There is basic problem with most of the students. In fact, it was a problem with me also when I was writing UPSC, or even now also when I've been writing an answer. It always consumes time. Why it consumes time? Because we always think in this way, ki the first line should be as such that the evaluator is getting impressed and he or she is giving us good marks. Look, it is not a sort of literature, paper of literature, that where we have to write something very impressive that the evaluator is getting impressed, getting impressed from the first line itself. Look, ultimately you have been getting marks for your content. What should be presented in the content that I have already discussed? Yeah, if our introductory line is better, that's fair enough. So we'll go for some sort of ready-made introduction and conclusions also, because that would help us in the examination hall, because that does not that won't consume much of our time. We'll go for those kind of ready-made introduction and conclusion, and somehow the conclusion also becomes very important. Specifically, I'll say in paper 1 and to a certain extent even in paper 2 also, because the conclusion should be as such, because in history there are there are always not a sort of firm conclusion. Sometimes there is nothing to conclude, but then you can't leave the answer open-ended. Though open-ended answer we have been writing, but that also does not mean that we are not writing any conclusion at all. We need to write a conclusion that should somehow end, that should somehow sum up or complete that answer by giving a sort of general sort of thing. So there might be many ways in which we are going to finish the answer, and that is very much depending on the topics. Let's say you have been writing any answer on society, or let's say any social issue. You have been writing any answer on let's say the status of women in the Gupta period, or status of women in the ancient times, the status of let's say peasantry in the Gupta period. So I think we can frame or we can go for a sort of general conclusion as per the topics. If any political question is there, how it can be concluded. If it is a if it is a social question, how it could be concluded. If it is a question from the religious history, how it can be concluded. So we'll have some kind of rough framing in our mind for the introduction and conclusion. So if we have been doing all these kind of things, in that case I think most of the things will be covered, right? So while having the as far the content is concerned, we are going to do this particular thing. Fine. So basically this is how this kind of content I'll try to provide in the class itself, right? And after covering this content wala part, which is the this is the first part, and then it comes to second part, content, right? And then it comes to, or it goes to the third part of the third part of our program, and that is about discussion on PYQs. So whatsoever questions have come from that particular topic in last 10-12 years, we'll just try to incorporate. We will make sure that at least the questions that have come from 2012 onwards, we have to discuss that. So we'll have a sort of brief discussion over all the questions that have come in the PYQs in last 12-13 years. And after that, right, I'll be having another important thing. We will be also discussing about the probable questions. The probable questions won't be the reframing of the same topic that have been asked earlier. The probable question is going to include basically the new dimensions from where the questions may be asked. New dimensions. So through the content we have already tried to cover the content of this part. Now here we'll just see some of the new questions, and out of these questions you are supposed to write one or two questions, just one or two questions. And I'm frankly telling you, these questions won't be evaluated. So if you're interested, in that case you can write the questions here. I'll be giving you 10-15 minutes and you'll be writing the answers. And after that, I'll come and I'll discuss the answer of that particular question, how I would have framed, or it would be better to frame the question in this way, right? So this is how we are going to proceed this particular course. I think the clarity is there, correct? Okay, fine. Now, Coming to paper 1 precisely, there are certain things we have already discussed for paper 1. Now, there are few things that you have to keep in mind for paper 1 that they are very important. I have already discussed that why the concepts are important, but then I would like to discuss something precisely for the content in this particular part. Look in for concept in this particular part. In paper 1, you have been reading a history of a larger period, am I correct? You have been reading a history of larger period. Let's exclude prehistory and start from IVC only. Even though if you have been counting it from IVC or calculating it from IVC, then it goes up to 18th century. So from 3500 to 1800. So at least the roughly I can say you have been covering the history of 5,000 years. Is it possible for you to study every minute events that has happened in ancient and the medieval one? No. I think that is very much depending on our sources also. If the sources would allow, in that case we might study but then if the sources are not allowing, which is more possible, because if you'll compare it with the modern India and the modern world, in that case I must say in modern India somehow we are having better access to the events. We know through the various sources, okay, non-cooperation movement, yes, it took place. We know about that. If it is about Swadeshi movement, we know that it has happened, and in fact, most of the major details we do have for the modern India. But when we have been discussing the things in the ancient and medieval India, in that case, we are not having that much clarity. To a certain extent in medieval India, yes. Why? Because some court historians were there, and since they had been recording everything, and that's how we do have some access. Okay, it is a biased information which is presented over there, but at least we are having some some access to the various events which were happening in the medieval times. But when it comes to ancient times, which is undoubtedly much more larger than the medieval part, we are not having access to these kind of things. So when you have been covering a larger period, so what would be the approach while covering it? Whether you are going to focus on the minute details or the major details? Major one. It means ki in the in this particular part you have to cover some larger or let's say some bigger changes. Right? That can be also written as transformations. Correct? One more thing that I missed to discuss in the previous part, that we'll be focusing on one more thing. I was missing that was keywords. The keywords do play a very important role in any of the paper that you have been writing. Either you are writing GS paper or any optional paper, ultimately the keywords are playing very significant role, and we have to include the keywords, such as I did change this word changes with this word transformation. Why? I hope you can understand which one is looking better, the transformation. So when you have been writing with these terms or you have been using these terms in your answer, so somehow the quality of your answer is increasing. That is also something you should keep in mind. So yes, we'll focus on the keywords also. Anyways, so I was discussing this point when it comes to the paper one, so since there are bigger transformations, so the moment it comes to transformation, you should understand that what are the informations which are important for us. So the moment you talk about the transformation, I hope the concept here becomes very important, because the moment you talk about transformation, it means that there must be some reasons behind the transformation. These must be leading certain changes, or let's say we can also say certain outcomes or the result that we can say. So whenever it comes to the various analysis regarding the change, it means that the role of historians are becoming very important here, because every historian, or at least the people from different school, are giving different interpretation, and that's how I can say that the historians becomes very important. So in concept we have to have these kind of understanding. Let's say if you see that the Varna system is appearing, so in that case there might be a simple way of understanding Varna system. Okay, society got divided into 4 parts, and that is how the Varna system has evolved. But the second part is that why did the Varna system evolve? Correct? The moment it comes to the question, why did the Varna system evolve? I think first the concepts are very important, that you understand what might be the reasons. And in fact, sometimes they have asked so much tricky questions. One, they have asked a question that was connecting the evolution of the Varna system with the gender changes or the gender relation changes. Now, you do not read this content directly anywhere, but then if you have idea that how come the evolution of Varna is consolidating patriarchy in the society, that's a very important thing. And in fact, your concept is clear, you would understand ki how come the changes in the Varna, or in fact it is not about Varna, any sort of changes in the society is ultimately consolidating patriarchy. Either it is about property right, consolidating patriarchy, right? It is about the birth or the origin of the caste system, consolidating patriarchy. So whenever you find these kind of changes, ultimately patriarchy is being consolidated. So now these are two very different dimensions which should be connected, or which can be connected. Now we will be discussing all these kind of things here in the concept that you can somehow make all those parallels, and you can write the answers of those things, correct? So the concept is very important in paper 1. Why? Because as I told you that there are some larger changes taking place, larger transformations happening here, and that's why here the concepts are important, and then these concepts can be conveyed to the evaluator through some diagrams and all. So there is great application of diagrams in paper 1, because these are the best way of conveying your ideas to the evaluator. You just made a diagram of the transformations, and then the way it is getting connected with the other things. So that would be the best approach to see. So yes, in paper 1 the concepts are very important, and that's why we'll be focusing more on concepts in paper 1 at least, right? In paper 2, of course, it's not very conceptual. There is a different approach that we are going to follow. The second thing, undoubtedly the sources in particular are important. Sources are not important only once when the question is based on sources. The sources are even important when it is not even based on the sources, right? Why? Because I told you that when you have been writing anything and then you are quoting certain sources, the quality of your answer is enhancing, right? That's how you should develop this habit of doing this. So we'll be focusing on the sources also. That's the second thing. Now I have already told you about the historiography that you should include. Now here I would like to say something. When it comes to historiography, now normally what happens, people know about the nationalist historiography. It's better to start with the imperialist historiography. But then do you know what are the other names? Right now, do you literally believe that somebody would be preferring to be called as the imperialist historians? Which is mostly being used is called as Cambridge School of Historians, and then there is another name that's called as either Liberal School of Historians, correct? These are certain new names what they had adopted, and I think they are still writing under these schools, correct? So that is one school. Undoubtedly the second school is the nationalist school. So, and it is very important. Sometimes you also call it the right-wing scholar. Sometimes you also call it the right-wing scholar, correct? Okay, then it comes to the third thing. After the rightists, there's another school. There is much hue and cry these days regarding the Marxist school of historians, correct? And then finally, these three schools are mostly known to everybody, okay? And in fact, there was one school, I will say, yes, people know about this also, that's called as subaltern school. I believe you all must be knowing the meanings of this, okay? Briefly, let me make you understand that what is the exact meaning of them. The imperialist school, I think you all can understand that they were under this mindset that they have to, such as if it is about ancient, so they always want to somehow undermine the achievements of Indians. That is a general mindset, correct? So they are always undermining the significance of India or the achievements of Indians, such as they are emphasizing more on what? Aryans, and they always want to prove one thing, that Aryans were basically coming from outside. Why? Because if they would prove that Aryans were coming from outside, in that case they would undermine the significance of Indians. And they will prove that Indians never had any achievement, rather the people coming from outside, they had all these achievements, and that's how they have been undermining the achievements of Aryans, correct? These are the people who try to prove that actually the Harappans were not the indigenous people, rather they had been coming from outside. So this is something which can be applied to most of the topics where they are having their own perception for that, and this is what they have been trying to put forward. That's the basic idea what is there, correct? But then yes, their approach got slightly changed these days, and that's why I just use one more name, that's called as the Liberal School of History Writing, correct? So now they are writing with a different name. Undoubtedly their tone has also gone down, correct? but then they are writing with it, they are still carrying that same approach. Yes, I told you that their tone is bit down now. Their tone is now bit like, what to say, bit softer now, correct? So this is like, one school. Then it comes to nationalist, of course it is the completely opposite school. Now they will be mostly believing in the concept of praising everything of India. Now if they would say, the imperialists or the liberals would say that Aryans were coming from outside, in response they'll say that Aryans were indigenous people. And in fact, in last few years, the way the nationalist historians have become so dominant in the Indian history writing, in last one decade I must say, because of what there are certain debates which were somehow not being discussed anymore, now they are again coming up. Such as, now you just check out the questions in past so many years, you won't find a single question asked on the Aryan debate. Now again you can find that the question has been asked on the Aryan debate. I guess in 2017 or 19 they have asked a question. I guess in 19 only they asked one question on Aryan debate. They have asked the question on the Aryan Harappan relationship. These are the new dimensions which are surfacing these days, and in fact now the setters of the questions, they have been getting the ideas from there and they have been framing the questions, correct? So this is how you should always keep in mind that the nationalist people, they are still there, and in fact they are giving a very new perception. Or bada fark pad, in the present context the nationalists cannot be ignored. They have become more important to us, right? And there were so many topics. At one point of time they used to be very burning topics, right? Then in between what happened, these topics somehow became useless and there no questions were being asked. Again we will find the same topics are being asked these days. अगर आपको बेहतर तरीके से समझना है तो मैं आपसे कहूँगा कि 1970s 80s में जो questions आते थे, आप उसको एक बार compare करके देखिए कि 2017-18 के बाद जो questions आ रहे हैं, आप एक बार compare करके देखिए आपको कितनी parity मिलेगी इसमें. So why? Because this is one change which is happening in Indian history. So I'll just say one thing, what always keep in mind, that whatsoever schools I have been talking about, among them this is very important. And in fact while writing the answers we will try to make sure that at least we have been including the name of one or two nationalist scholars, right? And when I say nationalist scholars, so most of the time people talk about just one scholar, Jadunath Sarkar, ठीक है, पता ही वहीं तक है, ठीक है. So nationalist historiography Jadunath Sarkar से आगे भी है, ठीक है. तो ऐसा नहीं कि हमें रुक जाना. There are so many scholars who have been writing. R.C. Majumdar, वो दूसरे, हाँ, Meenakshi. How do you know Meenakshi Jain? अच्छा, she is my colleague actually. We have worked together. ठीक है. हाँ, she has worked on Sati. She got Padam Shri ना. So I worked with her for 1 year together, and then she took BRS and then she left. Right? Both of us were in the same college. Okay, fine. Yes, you are correct. Meenakshi Jain is a right-wing scholar, and these days she is very prominent scholar, right? So yeah, that's correct. Okay, coming next to the Marxist scholars, undoubtedly they are important, right? Now it is a bit tricky. You know the narrative which is going on, or the discourse which is going on in the country right now. So how safe it is to use about the Marxist scholars? Undoubtedly there might be some people, they have been asking you to ignore the Marxist scholars. It is practically impossible. Why it is practically so much impossible? Because there are certain topics, they are being studied only by the Marxist scholars. And if you go deeper into the Marxist school, in that case, you all will be able to understand one thing, that the Marxist scholars have been, the Marxist scholars had a very unique tendency or a feature to inquire into the subjects. They are the people, those who tried to understand the transformation a lot, which was somehow missing with these two. Got my point or not? They are the point, for them the transformation was the most important thing in the history, and in fact they defined the history with respect to the changes and the transformations, right? Sorry, continuity and the changes. So since they coined up these ideas, कि ultimately in history what we are supposed to study, that's continuity and change, and that's how they are the people catching this continuity or the changes in a more appropriate way, and that's how they had been working more on them. But that's the reason, because of what you can't exclude them properly. There are certain topics where they are being studied only by the Marxist scholars, and that's how if you think that you can ignore them, that's practically not possible. But yes, we have to be a bit cautious where exactly we should use them and where exactly we should avoid them. These are some practical suggestions that I have been giving you. ठीक है, ideally हम कुछ भी कहें, practically यही है कि we have to be very careful. Then it comes to the subaltern school. Frankly speaking, as far as the subaltern school is concerned, as in paper 2 there is great importance of subaltern school, correct? Why there is great importance of subalterns in paper 2? Because when it comes to the subaltern school, since I think I believe that you all must be knowing about him, knowing about this school, this school is talking about writing a history from the lower perspective or from the below. So when you have been writing the history from the below, it means that you have been trying to somehow write the history of all those sections of society which have remained always ignored. Such as the maximum focus of all the three schools that I have discussed earlier is ultimately on what? They have been focusing ultimately on basically the political history, and that too when they are writing about the political history, their main focus remains on the upper layers, the ruling class, correct? So they are not even talking about the nobility and all these people also precisely. So that's how we can say this was considered to be one of the biggest lacuna of the history writing, Indian history writing, and in fact not only Indian history writing, but rather I say even the world history writing. So that was somehow resolved by getting a new school that's called as subaltern school. So in case of Europe, it started with one of the Italian scholars that's called as Antonio Gramsci, right? So he was the first person who wrote a very popular book that's called as Prison Notebook, and in fact that book was so influential that it has changed the whole history writing, or that tendency of history writing, or that method of history writing, and that's how it becomes very important. But then it sounds very nice that yes, you have to write the history from the below, but then practically it is very tough. Got my point? Sometimes there are certain things in terms of ideas, they sound very nice, but the moment you try to apply it, practically in that case it becomes very problematic. Such as I am just giving one example. My students, the good number of students have been writing means this year from here. I just thought of giving a sort of last help to them, and I thought I'll just prepare a document which is going to include only the keywords and the important scholars, such as IVC. So I would like to write all the important keywords and then the scholars, those who have been writing about this. Okay. And for last 2 days I have been struggling, right? I cannot finish the ancient yet. Why? Because sometimes you think okay, it can be done easily, but the moment you get deeper and then you start finding these are the problems, right? So that's how when it comes to the subaltern history writing, what problems were there? The major problem was this: sources were unavailable. So sources were not available. Undoubtedly, as you know that the sources are majorly covering the upper section of the society. No source was talking about the lower sections of the society, and that's how sources are not available. I hope it's quite clear to understand when you talk about ancient or even the medieval, do you literally find the possibility of finding the sources which are talking about the common man? I always used to say one thing, मजाक में ही कहता हूँ कि यार हरिया और सुखराम की कौन बात करेगा यार, है ना? नथुलाल की, हरिया की, सुखराम की बात कौन करेगा? ठीक है, बातें करनी तो भाई अकबर की करो, भाई चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य की करो, ठीक है, कौन बात करता है हरिया के बारे में? So that's the basic problem, right? And yes, they have been trying to find the solution of this. And what is the solution? Such as these days, one literature in the ancient period that has become very important. Jatkas. Why am I telling you this? Since it is the only text, precisely speaking, which is helping us to write a history with a subaltern perspective, right? And in fact, they are helping us to somehow solve some of the very basic questions, such as, I'll be just referring one case to make you understand this. You know about the exploitation of the lower caste, lower varna. But then the natural question comes in, whenever there was excessive exploitation, was there any resistance from the lower caste? Got the question or not? अगर किसी क्लास का आप एक्सेसिव एक्सप्लॉयटेशन करेंगे तो कहीं ना कहीं रेजिस्टेंस दिखेगी तो सही, लेकिन सवाल है कि एनी ब्राह्मणिकल टेक्स्ट वुड प्रेफर टू राइट अबाउट एनी रेजिस्टेंस कमिंग फ्रॉम द शूद्र साइड, दे वोंट राइट, correct? But then we find certain stories in the text like Jatka which are talking about the resistance. Now you just think that if you have been mentioning this in your answer, the Jatkas are giving one example, and then keep in mind again and again I am telling you, whenever you have been writing any answer on the ancient society, never ever miss to mention this text, Jatkas. And if you can mention few names of the Jatkas, that would be literally wonderful, and develop these kind of things. That's why I have been I'm giving some minutes to Jatkas. Why? Because that is going to give it give a sort of different impression to the evaluator. He understands, or she understands. Jatka is a very important text that shows specifically when you have been writing something with a subaltern perspective, in that case it is very important, especially when you have been writing something on the society, especially when you have been writing something on the status of women. So whenever you have been trying to attempt these kind of questions, you should definitely mention about the Jatkas. And as I told you that few Jatkas, if you can mention, the name of the Jatakas, that would be like, somehow better. But if you don't remember that, at least mention the Jatakas, right? So it is more applicable undoubtedly in the modern section. Why? Because in modern segment we have so many sources through which we can literally recreate the history with a subaltern perspective. But the moment it comes to, let's say, ancient and medieval, it becomes literally tough. Medieval में तो और हालत खराब है, क्योंकि medieval में जितनी भी writings है वो सारे जो है वो elite perspective से की गई है, और ये वजह है जिसकी वजह से हमारे पास बड़े limited source है जिससे हम ज़्यादा कुछ बात नहीं कर पाते उसके बारे में, ठीक है. बट हाँ, ancient में और modern में possibilities है. The greater possibility is there in the modern segment, but then lesser possibility is there, but it is there in the ancient time also. So we have to develop this habit of retaining this, okay. But then you all talk about these schools, that's pretty fine. But then in the recent times, what has happened now, such as from 1950s to 2000 or 2010, a sort of historiography remained dominant, that is known as the Marxist history writing, right? But then you all understand that even all the people, those who had been writing the history with a Marxist perspective, they were also not fully convinced with the Marxist history writing. Correct. And that's how a new term appeared, that's called as neo-Marxism. Correct. You might have heard these terms. अगर नहीं सुना है तो आज सुन लीजिए. There's another term that appeared, that's called as neo-Marxism. I'm not going to discuss all these kind of things, ठीक है, आपके लिए इतना यूजफुल नहीं है, बट मैं आपको कुछ चीज़ समझाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि that's neo-Marxism. It means कि neo-Marxism clearly tells you one thing कि yes, historians were not somehow convinced. And frankly speaking, now mostly if I'll ask this question to the students that इरफान हबीब किस स्कूल से बिलोंग करते हैं, आप सीधा बोलेंगे मार्क्सिस्ट स्कूल से. बट ये सही नहीं है, ठीक है. He does not belong to pure Marxist school. What the way we see मतलब in which category you keep D.D. Kosambi, in the same category you can't keep this fellow Irfan Habib. In the category where you keep R.S. Sharma, you can't keep this fellow in the same category. In fact, there's another Marxist scholar called as D.N. Jha. He's a hardcore Marxist scholar, right? But then he, on many grounds, is not convinced with the ideas of R.S. Sharma, and on many points, he is even giving the counter arguments of R.S. Sharma. So understand this point. When you say Marxist, that does not mean they have been following a fixed principles. In fact, people like Irfan Habib, then Sirin Musbi, right? They are also kept in the category of basically neo-Marxism rather than Marxism, because as I told you that they themselves have refused so many ideas of Marxism. And the way Marxism is being criticized these days, and it is being said that it was an utopian idea, that what Marx said, it was practically not possible. So Marx had imagined everything on the basis of his previous study of the society, and that's how his role becomes important in history. But then understand this point, since it has been proved it is never going to happen, and that's why now it is under review. And that's why it is not only because of certain reasons or certain changes in India, Marxism is going going on the back foot. That is not correct. Marxism already was under some sort of criticism, and this is true also. And somehow it is Marxist historians, undoubtedly they have been writing a more logical, rational, and interesting history. But then it does not mean that they are writing the correct history. Correct. So these are I'm not saying I'm not this much I'm such a great scholar that I can say that they are right, they are wrong, or something like that. I'm just trying to give you a logic that why they are under review, and why there is a sort of negative feedback towards them. That is what I'm trying to make you understand. So since there are new terms are coming, and right now specifically from 2000 onwards, 2000 onwards, what are the things that should be what are the major changes? Nowadays people are not writing precisely under the name I'm a Marxist scholar, I'm a nationalist scholar, I'm a let's say liberal scholar. Now they are not using these kind of names, right? So now it is quite possible that you are inclined towards the Marxist historiography or Marxist school, but at the same time you are convinced on certain grounds with the nationalist school, correct? So now the things have changed to a greater extent, and in fact there are certain new terms which are appearing in history, and they are also changing the direction of history, such as regional history. That's a new term that has become so popular these days, and regional history. Then gender history, correct? It was there earlier also, but then it was known as the woman history. Now it has been changed as the gender history. So what I can say, and in fact there was another term such as postmodernism, such as another term that's annals. आपको उतना नहीं जाना है, but the only thing I'm willing to convey that Indian history writing had been going through a change, and probably these changes have taken place in the Western context much earlier, but then these are being followed in India presently. And that's how a new school, what is important for you, and that you should keep in mind, that is important. This is no school. Actually, there are all those people which are writing the history with a very new perspective these days, that's called as revisionist school. Well, Romila Thapar is also, she doesn't consider herself as a Marxist scholar. She calls herself from Annal School of History. हाँ, वो थोड़ा रिविजनिस्ट के कैटेगरी में आते हैं, वो मार्क्सिस्ट नहीं है. उन्होंने ही तो फ्यूडलिज्म के आइडिया को काउंटर किया, लेकिन ही वाज द पर्सन. सो हाउ कम ही कुड फिट इन दैट? बिकॉज देयर वाज अ सीरियस क्लास बिटवीन हिम एंड आर एस शर्मा, है ना. तो नहीं रख सकते हैं, तो है तो मार्क्सिस्ट. इसीलिए मैंने कहा कि अब ना वो वाली क्राइटेरिया नहीं फॉलो होती है. ठीक है, आई एम बिट क्लोज टू हरबंस मुखिया. ठीक है, हरबंस मुखिया के साथ जो है कई बार मिला हूँ इधर, पिछले 4-5 सालों से ज़्यादा मिलना शुरू किया. So now I am getting a better chance to understand him. So he doesn't consider himself to be from the Marxist school. तो वही मैं बताने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि अब चीज़ें थोड़ी बदल गई हैं. So it's better to keep them in the category of revisionist school.
But sir,
हाँ.
nowadays Romila Thapar kind of a retired historian.
Look, a historian never retires. Correct. The point is that whenever it comes to historians, the best thing that they have done, they have written their book. And sometimes, like, there are a couple of books, they are so logical, they are so impressive that we are not able yet to come out from those books or the ideas of those books. Just now I had been discussing about Antonio Gramsci. This is one philosopher I am very impressed of. Okay, but that person was literally, if you read that Prison's Notebook, na, और सबसे impressive writing लगी मुझे आज तक की जो है जितनी किताबें मैंने पढ़ी है. So, and in fact she is known for revising her own theories, like, a couple of times she has revised multiple of her theories. Modern Empire, and then Ashoka's, like, concepts. She has revised multiple of her theories.
How we look that old time historians like Lalita Ditya's historian.
अच्छा, राज तरंगन या जौना राजा? No, I don't. Kalhan.
So how could we put them in a school or?
I'll discuss that. No, they cannot be fit, like, they cannot be fit in the school. Right? The reason is that what history we have been reading, that is known as the modern history. Correct. And from 19th century we started developing a different concept of history. Prior to 19th century there was a different, like, let's say it's better to say prior to 18th century there was a different concept of history. So when it comes to 19th century, when some of the great scholars are coming and they have started defining history with a different perspective, and then history, what we have been talking about, it is only the modern history. It is quite probable that when the Puranas were written, when the epics were written, they were written with that perspective that they have been writing history, and that's how the question is being asked to you always, the Itihasa Purana tradition. What is Itihasa? That is, like, epics. So it may be it's quite possible that the Itihasa or the Mahabharata was written with that perspective, okay, this is the history that they had been writing, correct. So I think that would be completely different, because the period what we have been discussing, there was a very different notion of history that was prevailing, and in fact it is known as a medieval history writing that was mostly influenced by religion and all, though Kalhana's Rajtarangani is not fit in that, specifically the Persian writings, right. So they are fitting into a different criteria. Okay?
So they are not from this criteria, they are fit into different criteria.
Yes.
Including that Kalhana, Kalidas and
Correct.
medieval historians.
Correct.
Also.
That's what we are going to discuss. Like, the next topic what we're going to do, sources, we'll try to evaluate them, to what extent it is correct to call them history. I'm not getting into these kind of dimensions because that's not very important. When I do foundation, I always talk about it, that the perception of history itself is changing. When Herodotus is writing about history, he was having a different perception for it. He said, actually the current events or the present events should be recorded in order to transfer it to the future generation. So for him, the history was this. But the moment it comes to some other scholars, they said, actually what is history? It's not only about the development should be recorded in order to convey it to the future generations. Rather, he said, actually the history of the society is the various challenges being faced by the society that should be conveyed to the next generation. That how this community has faced the challenges, which was coming from outside. Somebody said, we can't study about the outer challenges. Rather, you need to talk about even the inner challenges which were coming. So basically, that's how it's being coming. So from the time of Herodotus till, I can say that person E.H. Carr, there is so many changes which are coming in the perception of history itself. So here we have been precisely discussing about the modern history. Okay, maybe while having discussion over the medieval sources, and then while doing the discussion over the ancient sources, we'll talk about it. What are the criticism? What are the positive things? Where exactly we can fit them? Can we call them history or not? We'll be discussing these kind of questions when we'll go for evaluation of Rastarangani, Albiruni and so on. हम बात करेंगे उसके बारे में, सब वो सब है हमारे इसमें, ठीक है. आई होप यू गॉट द पॉइंट कि रेविसनस स्कूल, राइट. अब ये रेविसनस स्कूल कौन है यार? ये बड़े करंट लोग हैं, अभी लोग हैं जो अभी लिख रहे हैं, अभी एक्टिव है, ठीक है. सो दे आर स्टिल वेरी एक्टिव, करेक्ट. एंड व्हाट आई यूज्ड टू से ऑलवेज कि व्हेन इट कम्स टू making the papers and evaluation of the papers, do you literally believe that the people had been coming 20 years back, the same people are still continuing in making in making paper and then evaluating papers? No. Now the new set of people were coming. Now if you'll see the question paper, you'll find that these days there is greater emphasis on regional history or the peripheral history. Why there is so much greater emphasis on the regional history or the peripheral history? Because now the modern researches are mostly there in that part. Let's say I started doing my research. I started my research in 2008, correct? So there was one possibility that I could have worked on the demographic history of whole India. I just went with this idea to my supervisor. So my supervisor said, पागल हो गए, इतनी बड़ी जगह पे कैसे काम करोगे? जगह छोटा करो. And then my MPhil work was confined to only Bengal region, correct? So since I got confined to Bengal, that's how the regional history is being created. So now the recent researches are somehow becoming regional, because scope is also getting lesser to work on the history of whole India, and that's how these are the new dimensions which are coming. So regional history, or let's say the peripheral history, is the new history, and in fact you'll find so many questions. Now they are asking the questions on Jona Raja. They have never asked the question on Jona Raja ever before. They have been asking the question on Lal date. They never asked the question on Lal date. Why in last 10 to 15 years you'll find that these kind of peripheral histories are being asked. Even in the recent times you can see that there were so many questions are being asked on the history of Persian literature, history of Sanskrit literature, right? Development of Hindi. Why these kind of questions are there? Just think logically. There are certain reasons because of what these questions are these days being asked a lot. So please understand the concept, understand the syllabus and the pattern which is there in the UPSC right now. So don't prepare those regular topics. Simultaneously, focus more on basically those peripheral topics where the more researches were going on. While preparing this one page, one theme, I kept in mind, and in fact that was the basic thing. What was the process I followed, I must tell you. I just set with the catalog of all the recent writings and all, and I asked some of my students also to collect the books which are published in last 20 years. And in fact we just collected some of the influential books out of that have been published in last 2 decades, and then we tried to take information from them also. This is the process that we have followed for making it. So I have tried honestly to incorporate as many as sources are concerned, sources are possible for me, the recent sources. So that's how we have just tried to include the revisionist sources as many as possible, correct? That's all about this year. Okay, fine. So this is the historiography what I had been discussing, correct? So we'll be focusing on these things. We'll be focusing on concept, then we'll focus on what is the concept I have already discussed. Then I told you about the sources and the historiography, and then as I told you, this is how we are going to cover the content. Any doubt if you have, you can go ahead. Keywords तो आते रहेंगे हर जगह पे, हर टॉपिक के हिसाब से will be incorporating keywords. In fact, the notes that you will be given the keywords are highlighted, they are made bold. तो आप समझ आइए कि वो कीवर्ड है आपके लिए और आपको उसको ध्यान में रखना है, ठीक है. एंड अगर हम बात करते समय भी बात करेंगे, जैसे ये वाला कीवर्ड यहाँ पे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, ये कभी मत छोड़ना. तो आप अपनी जो ऐसा नहीं कि दैट नोट्स व्हाट आई हैव गिवन यू दैट इज द फाइनल सोल्यूशन. साथ में यू विल बी मेकिंग अ रनिंग नोट्स ऑल्सो. उसमें जैसे कीवर्ड्स नोट कर लिया, कुछ अलग से हिस्टोरियन आ गए तो उसको नोट कर लिया, हम वो करते रहेंगे, ठीक है. ओके फाइन. सो नाउ द फर्स्ट टॉपिक वी आर गोइंग टू बिगिन विद, दैट इज सोर्सेस. I have already told you that as far as the sources are concerned, they are very important. Acha, one more thing. There are 3 topics in this week, ठीक है? And these topics are sources, and then prehistory, and then which one? Megalithic. जो 2 टॉपिक्स हैं हमारे, प्री हिस्ट्री और मेगालिथिक, वो बहुत कमजोर टॉपिक है, ठीक है. They are not very useful topic for us, but then yes, we'll cover because on some regular intervals you can find the questions from there. 4-5 साल के बाद रिपीट होते रहते हैं क्वेश्चंस उसमें, तो हम छोड़ेंगे नहीं उसको कवर करेंगे. बट देन दैट वी आर गोइंग टू कवर इन जस्ट वन क्लास, ठीक है. एंड दिस क्लास एंड द नेक्स्ट क्लास विल बी डिवोटिंग टू दिस वन बिकॉज दिस वन इज ए बिगर टॉपिक. नाउ फर्स्ट, when it comes to sources, I have already told you that there are two specifications of sources. What are they? One, there are some direct questions are there on sources. Correct? Now they are asking how come you find that the Brahminical literature are serving as source of Indian history? How come the Buddhist literature are helping us to write the history? How come, let's say, archaeological sources or let's say inscriptions are helping us to write this? There are certain questions which are directly. Of course, I have been referring more simple questions, but they are not asking this much simple question. They have been asking for sort of more complicated sort of thing. Okay, that we'll discuss while having the discussion over the question. And then there are certain indirect use of sources in answer or let's say in question. I hope you got my point. Now these are sources what we have to refer in our answer. So here we'll be focusing only on this part. We are not focusing on this part because this too we'll be doing with the topic only. जब भी हम topic करेंगे, Mauryan करेंगे, तो we'll see that okay, what are the sources that you should definitely mention in the while writing the answers. So that is what we are going to focus. Okay, fine. So first of all, though it is something which is very simple, but then I'm telling you, let's say when it comes to the sources, you know about the sources being divided into two parts. They are known as literary and archaeological sources. Now the literary sources can be further divided. Now this is the literary source that can be further divided into many parts, such as one is the Brahminical source, the second is Buddhist sources, and third we can talk about the Jain text. And as you understand this is not very important, never they have asked any question from the Jain text, but they may ask, correct? I am not refusing it. Chances बहुत कम है. इसके पीछे एक reason है that they cannot ask the questions from the Jain text. Very simple reason. Most of the compilation of the Jaina text has taken place in the 5th century CE. Keep in mind, 5th century CE in Balbi, Gujarat. So since they got compiled too late, and that's how they do not fit in that criteria of sources. Why the Buddhist sources were being compiled at that point of time only, whenever they are composed, and that's how they are the most important sources. Okay, so these are the texts. So here let's go begin with the Brahminical sources. So when it comes to the Brahminical sources, so I think the most important category among the Brahminical sources is the Shruti literature, and then it comes to the second category, that is the Smriti literature. Now in the Shruti category, there are different texts which are there. They are Vedas, Brahmanas, Puranas are not Aranyakas, correct. Brahminical source मतलब precisely the Vedic text, correct. Vedic text can be divided into Shruti and Smriti, and in Shruti category we keep Vedas, Brahmins, Aranyakas, and okay, fine. Now when it comes to Smriti literature, now there again you can find multiple things. The most important is epics, then the Puranas, then I think that's not that much important, is Dharma Sutras. Then you can talk about Vedangas, and then Upavedas and so on. There are many. Okay. Dharma Sutras important. Now, why am I giving you the list of these things? Let's try to identify that what are the important topics for us as far as the questions are concerned. Now, from where you believe that the questions may be free? हो सकता है यहाँ से? Do you literally believe that separate question can be framed from the Brahmanas? No. There is no possibility of a separate question from Brahmanas. Correct? तो हम इसको reject कर देते हैं. From Aranyakas नहीं पूछ सकते. Upanishadas नहीं पूछ सकते, डायरेक्टली नहीं पूछ सकते कि उपनिषदास कैसे हेल्प करते हैं, नहीं पूछेंगे, ठीक है। कहाँ कैसे पूछ सकते हैं? इट कैन बी लिंक टू रिलीजन, it can be linked to the philosophical transition that could be noticed. So these are certain ideas which can be like asked from here. But directly, how come the way you have seen the questions from the Puranas or Itihasa Purana tradition, that kind of question you won't find from this particular part. Okay, and so this is one important source that we need to cover here. Correct. Moving to the next part. Coming to this part, epics are of course important. So far they haven't asked this question directly, but then I believe that in future it can be asked directly. How come the epics are helping us in writing the history of India? Then these questions that has been asked like so many times, undoubtedly. Well, Dharma Sutra so far not being asked, but I find it important. I believe that from Dharma Sutra the question may be framed. This much content is there in Dharma Sutra that separate question can be framed. Yes, go ahead. No, Dharma Sutra includes basically Smritis and then Griha Sutra, Sulva Sutra and which one? Srauta Sutra. Sraut Sutra. ठीक है? So this is Dharma Sutra. ठीक है? Okay. Then इसमें से तो बिल्कुल possibility नहीं है. ठीक है, उसको हटा देते हैं. And then इसमें से possibility नहीं. So I think when it comes to Brahmanical literature, you might have seen sometimes they have asked question even directly on the Shruti literature. Once they have asked question on last 10 years only, I am telling you that they have asked one question on the Shruti literature. And then as I told you that Vedas अभी तक directly नहीं पूछा है, but there is great potential of questions from the Vedas. Okay. Then epics, Puranas they have been asked, Dharma Shastra they haven't asked, but then yes, question may be asked. Now coming to Buddhist literature, right? Again, that is very important category, I must tell you. So when it comes to the Buddhist literature, now there are very less chance that they are asking any question from a separate Buddhist source. Correct? They are not going to ask how come the Milind Pano is helping in writing the history. Correct? So you know about the division of Buddhist literature. They are divided into two parts, that's called as canonical and non-canonical. ये सब pre की information है, आपको बस थोड़ा जानना चाहिए. Canonical and non-canonical. Now canonical includes the three Pitkas, Sutipitak, Vinay Pitak and Abhidhamma Pitka. Correct? Whether the non-canonical mostly includes the Sanskrit text, correct? Sanskrit as in such as Milind Panno, Buddha Charit, right, and so on. There are several texts which were written in Sanskrit. Then there is one text falling within the Buddhist category. From here there is a separate possibility. There is a possibility of a separate question, and that is the जातकास. बिल्कुल पूछ सकते हैं जातकास में, इतना पोटेंशियल है उसमें कि जातकास से एक सेपरेट क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं. करेक्ट? तो जातकास से एक सेपरेट क्वेश्चन हो सकता है. सो इन जनरल फ्रॉम बुद्धिस्ट लिटरेचर एंड इन पर्टिकुलर द जातका लिटरेचर. करेक्ट? एंड देन इट कम्स टू विच वन? The Jain literature. As I did tell you, I don't believe that they are going to ask any question from the Jain literature. मुझे बिल्कुल possibility नहीं लगती. इतनी history पढ़ने के बाद इतना तो समझ में आया है.
They lost their original documents and they compiled it in 5th century in Vardhan.
Correct. There are multiple reasons because of what it is not applicable, right?
Actually, I went to that National Museum, so they
Acha.
have some proof that they have lost.
That's correct.
Burn their original documents, and then they have, after 200 or something years, then in the gap they organized a Jain council in Vallabhi, Gujarat, and then
Correct. Okay. So this is a sort of brief journey of this, and note down this sources what we are going to cover. We are going to cover Vedas, epics, Puranas, Dharma Sutras, and then Buddhist literature. In general, right? In general and Jatka literature as specific. ठीक है, इतने sources हम यहाँ से cover करने वाले हैं. Okay, fine. Then it comes to the rest kind of sources. So the next category is, next category is the foreign literature. Now in foreign literature, most of you are aware of just two kind of foreign literature, and they are ग्रीक एंड चाइनीज. वही मुझे पता है, मियाँ की दौड़ मस्जिद तक होती है. ठीक है. सो फॉरेन लिटरेचर में आपको एक तो लिटरेचर है दैट इज नॉन एज, नहीं आप और स्पेसिफिक हो गए, हम एक एक करके पहुँचेंगे. दैट्स ग्रीक लिटरेचर. देन इट इज Chinese literature. But apart from this, there are some more literature that we use. And in fact, won't be unfair in using, in saying that there is another literature. Yes. When it comes, वो हम अर्ली मिडीवल में देखेंगे. आई एम जस्ट एक्सक्लूडिंग दैट फॉर दैट रीजन, राइट. वो हम जितने भी अर्ली मिडीवल एक ही है, उसको हम तब बात करेंगे अरब सोर्सेज के बारे में, ठीक है. हम अर्ली मिडीवल के टाइम पे बात कर लेंगे. हियर आई हैव बीन प्रिसाइजली फॉलोइंग द ये वन, द एंशिएंट इंडिया. आई होप इट्स क्लियर. लाइक दीज आर द वेरियस सोर्सेज. Yes, it's really tough that they have been asking a question directly on, let's say, Tibetan or Sri Lankan sources, right? Sri Lankan is having the potential, frankly speaking. There are so many texts written in Sri Lanka, ठीक है? And in fact, there are some major information we have been collecting from the Sri Lankan text. For example, I must tell you that this you might, since you all have studied history, you all must be knowing one fact, that it is believed that the post-modern period was the period for the Brahminical revivalism, and it was a sort of very, very suffocating period for Buddhism. Correct, na? It is said for so many rulers, such as it is even said for that founder of Sunga dynasty, that's called as Pushyamitra Sung. Even his son also, Agnimitra. It has been said for both the fellows that they have killed so many Buddhist people. It is something very similar written for Meherkul also, he is killing so many people. From where exactly we have been getting these information, they are mostly mentioned in the Sri Lankan text. There are a series of texts that you find over there, such as Deep Vansa, Mahavansa, Dibyavadan, Mahavadan, Asokavadan, and so on. So these texts have been compiled over there, and in fact they are presenting this kind of biased view, which has been rejected later on by the Indian scholars, and they say, no, actually this is incorrect information. On the other hand, nowadays Pushyamitra Sunga was being portrayed as the savior, as the protector, as the patronizer of Buddhism, rather than a person who was willing to finish Buddhism as such. Correct? So there's a very different perception. This question has been asked in UPSC, that to what extent it is correct to say that postmodern period was the period for Brahminical revivalism, and it was a negative period for Buddhism. I do not remember the exact wordings of the question, but the real sense of the question was this. So yes, this is having the potential to be asked in form of proper questions. Correct? Sri Lankan text, fine. Tibetan texts are not that important. I don't believe that from here the possibility is there of the question. But then, yes, while writing answers, we can refer them somewhere. It is quite possible that we are referring them somewhere while writing the answers. So that's why, it's important. We can refer again some of the text of Nepal while writing the answer, but then separate questions cannot be asked.
Is it okay to put Nepal as a different
because
part of India?
No, I think if I have been using it, एक चीज़ मैं बहुत हमेशा clear करता हूँ अपनी क्लास में, everything that I say in this class, बोल मेरे हैं, शब्द. So until and unless I read something in any of the proper history book, I do not say. So they have mentioned it as a separate category. I have been mentioning it. Right? छोड़ देते उसको. बाकी तो बहस करने के लिए पूरी लाइफ पड़ी है ना. हिस्ट्री में डिबेट्स बहुत हो सकते हैं, हमें जाना ही नहीं है. A to Z में हमारा पर्पस ये है कि हम डिबेट में नहीं जाना है, हमें उस पर रहना है. ठीक है. ओके. Undoubtedly there is good possibility, of course there is great possibility of the Greek sources and the Chinese sources. Now when it comes to the Greek sources, I would like to just have a sort of brief summary of the Greek sources. So here you can find one possibility for in general questions. Correct, na? There is one possibility that in general they have been asking about the Greek sources. Mind you, if they have been asking a question on the Greek sources itself, then in that case you are not going to write only about Indica. Then you will be mentioning about all these writers such as Strabo is there, Pliny is there, Nearchus is there, all these people you will be mentioning. And in fact it's not necessary that you have been explaining all of them separately. You will be writing that how come they have been helping us in writing the history. Such as when it comes to Strabo and all, they are helping us in rewriting the history of Chandragupta Maurya. In fact, we won't be capable of recreating the history of Mauryans without the support of these Greek texts. So either it's about Chandragupta Maurya or let's say Bindusar. Undoubtedly we are owing a lot to the Greek sources because they are in enabling us. So that's how like you have to mention them. Okay, fine. Now undoubtedly among them there is a great significance of indica that I don't need to tell you, and we have to cover indica separately also because there is a possibility of it, right? So indica will be covering in general, right, sorry, in particular, but then in general we'll be discussing about those texts. In the Greek text there are certain texts which are very important, such as Natural Historica, पेरीप्लस ऑफ एरिथ्रियन सी एंड द ज्योग्राफी का, ठीक है। ये 3 टेक्स्ट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, अलग से क्वेश्चन कभी नहीं आएगा इस पे, लेकिन इनका रेफरेंस कभी भी आप नहीं चूक सकते। आर मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द हिस्ट्री विच इज टॉकिंग अबाउट द इंडो रोमन ट्रेड इज प्रिसाइजली फ्रॉम दैट पर्टिकुलर टेक्स्ट, करेक्ट? And that's why whenever you have been writing about the trade in the ancient times, never ever miss to mention that particular text, because it is so important, I am telling you, correct? So yes, indica is important. So in both the ways we are going to cover this side, like, and in Chinese text there are 2 persons. One is Fa Yan and Wen San. These 2 are there. Of course, like very rare questions are being asked, but then I believe yes, they do have the potential to be asked in form of questions.
One of them was came to India to get that Vinay Pitika.
They came, both of them came to like for the same reason. They wanted to just translate the Indian books, ठीक है, और वो जाना चाहते थे। ये कुछ ऐसा ही है जैसे एक मंदिर जो है अगर इंडोनेशिया में है तो हम जा रहे हैं, उनको भी ऐसा, वो तो बर्थ प्लेस था बुद्धा का। सो दे जस्ट केम हियर फॉर 2 थिंग्स, पिलग्रिमेज नंबर 1, and second they just needed to compile, or they needed to like take some Indian books, Buddhist texts from here, and they stayed here for so much time, and they had been like just creating the copies. उन्होंने मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट्स बनाए और वो मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट्स लेके गए फिर वहाँ पे, और फिर which one, the Nalanda one? I think I don't know about that.
One of them is become very.
I think.
Son stayed at Nalanda from Silla, and he studied over there. So by that time, while he was studying over there, he was made kind of a professor. He used to
अच्छा, हाँ, that's okay. That is like okay. Chancellor तो मैंने नहीं सुना था कभी. Correct? Yeah. So this is like about the foreign literature. So that's it. Like like this is the possibility of the questions. Okay, fine. Now, then it comes to the next category, that is the archaeological sources. Now there is a very simple division, archaeological sources. They can ask the question either on inscription or else, sorry, coins, literature or else coins. That's it. There are 2 possibilities. इसमें ज़्यादा डिटेल में जाना नहीं, कुछ है नहीं ऐसा करने के लिए. Correct? These are a sort of brief survey of the sources. Now, whenever you have been covering any source, or you have been writing about the significance of that particular source as a source of history writing, what are the things that you should keep in mind while doing so? First of all, in fact, this is a general parameter or a framework that I have been giving you. And I must tell you that this is an idea which is applicable to most of the places, such as whenever you have a broader theme to cover, always like divide the theme into multiple smaller areas, such as political, economic, yes, economic, social, religious, and cultural. This is in general applicable to all the sources. In fact, at any point of time, whenever you have been dealing with any broader topic, I think this is something which can be applied, correct? So let's say the question has asked to you that how come the Vedas are useful sources for history writing? Now you might write n number of information, but then you won't be getting extra point for that. You just need to write how come they are conveying the political information, economic information, social information, regional religious information, and then it comes to the cultural information. Cultural matlab if they are providing some information on art and culture and all these parts, art, culture, language, literature, right? So these are the things which are there. So this is a general category, and if frankly speaking, like most of the topics, most of the sources we are going to cover under this particular parameter only, right? So it is a parameter that you should always keep in mind, because whenever any question is coming on the sources, and if they are not specifying any particular dimension, in that case you need to deal with the question in that particular way, correct? Then the second thing what you have to keep in mind is that there should be the critical study of the sources. Now what is that critical study of the sources? Some negative aspects, okay? So some negative dimensions, or how come they are not fulfilling our criteria. So you should develop, like you should have the points on the fingertips कि हाँ, अगर मुझे नेगेटिव लिखना है तो मुझे ये सारे पॉइंट्स लिखने हैं, लिटरेचर का नेगेटिव लिखना है ये सारे पॉइंट्स लिखने हैं, आर्कियोलॉजिकल का लिखना है तो ये सारे लिखने हैं. So some should be negative, like points that should be there. Okay, fine. So whenever you have been evaluating the sources, any source, that is a broader framework of writing the question. Negative points may be in multiple directions depending on the sources, right? It may vary. For Brahminical sources, it may be different. For Buddhist sources, it may be different. For the archaeological sources, it must be different, right? So as per that only we are going to have this. So this is a basic framework of everything, sources precisely, and then some other ideas. ठीक है? So आज रहने देते हैं यहीं पे. कल से we'll start from the first topic, that is sources, and tomorrow we'll cover the sources and then we'll go for that process of pre-PYQs and right.